Breaking news this morning. Ukraine has wipes out Russian radar, drones, and a massive depot. We're looking at a huge coordinated series of strikes that has, well, it's effectively blinded the Russian air defense network in the south. It is Thursday, January 29, 2026, and if you haven't seen the satellite imagery coming out, wow, you are missing what might just be the pivotal moment of this winter's campaign. The scale of the destruction here is creating a totally new reality on the ground. But before we get into the smoke and the fire, a quick message. For those of you who really want to stay ahead of the curve, subscribe to Defense Reports. It is your go-to source for timely, in-depth military and defense reports. If you support Ukraine and you want the truth from the front lines, that is the place to be. I'm Alex. Join me with Arian, the latest podcast by Defense Report, for a sharp, no-nonsense breakdown of the latest in global defense news, military technology, and strategic developments. And today we're going to cover, well, we are covering the night the lights went out for the Russian army.
We're talking about a massive, coordinated series of strikes taking place right now, literally in the last 24 hours, targeting the very brains and lungs of the Russian war machine.
Brains and lungs is absolutely the right way to put it. We're not just seeing, some ammunition cooking off in a field somewhere. This is systemic. We have confirmed reports of a new Ukrainian missile, they're calling it the Flamingo, and it is outperforming Western expectations by a huge margin. And we're seeing this emerging concept of blind corridors being carved right into Russian airspace, basically nullifying their big S-400 advantages.
And the cost. The cost equation is just getting staggering. I was looking at the morning brief, and the casualty numbers they're honestly hard to comprehend. 1.2 million Russian casualties since the start of the war. But the shocking part isn't just the number, it's the ratio, the amount of loss for the tiny amount of land they've gained. We'll get to that grim math in a bit.
Right. The math is the context, but the strikes are the news. So our mission today is to explain why this isn't just more explosions. It's a fundamental shift in doctrine. We are witnessing the maturation of what's called strategic interdiction. Ukraine isn't just fighting the soldier in the trench anymore. They're bypassing the front line to destroy Russia's ability to wage war from the inside out.
So let's jump right into that breaking news. The Unmanned Systems Forces, they released their after-action reports this morning, January 29th, and we're seeing a triad of targets: logistics, energy, and detection. Let's start with Makivka.
Makivka is it's a classic logistics hit, but just on a massive scale. This was a central rocket and artillery weapons depot. Locals were reporting secondary detonations that lasted all through the night. This is a major hub for their Donetsk grouping. When you delete a node this large, you starve the artillery batteries on the zero line for days, maybe even weeks.
But then you have the grid strikes. The Myrna Electrical Substation in Mariupol and the Azovska Substation in Stary Krim. Now, usually when we hear substation hit, people think about civilians losing power. But looking at the voltage here, 330 kilovolts and 220 kilovolt, this feels different.
It is very different. You have to understand the grid. A 330 kilovolt substation, that's not for, streetlights. That is high voltage transmission for heavy industrial loads. These specific substations power the industrial base in the occupied territories. We're tossing tank repair depots, rail switching yards, fuel pumping stations.
So you can't just plug that stuff into a portable generator.
Exactly. You can run a field hospital on a backup generator. You cannot run a heavy industrial lathe or an electric locomotive on one. By hitting these high voltage nodes, Ukraine is basically freezing their rear area logistics. Equipment that breaks down can't get repaired because the plant doesn't have the juice.
Which brings us to probably the most significant hit of the last 24 hours, the Podlyat radar. Confirmed destroyed near friends in occupied Crimea.
This is the one that has the entire defense community really paying attention.
And the Podlyat is the K1 variant, right? The one that's a specialist for low-altitude targets.
Correct. The 48 YA6K1. It's a mobile radar, costs about $5 million, but its value is purely strategic. The S-300s, the S-400s, they're long-range beasts, but they have a weakness.
The horizon.
Horizon. They can't see what's hugging the ground until it's almost too late. The Podlyat is designed specifically to fill that gap to spot the low-flying drones and cruise missiles.
So if you take out the Podlyat,
yeah,
you're essentially blinding the S-400 to anything flying low.
You're poking out the eyes of the air defense network. Without that radar, the battery is blind to that low-altitude approach. And this is what we mean by blind corridors. Ukraine isn't trying to destroy every single SAM site. That's impossible. Instead, they were surgically removing the key detection units to clear a safe path. A corridor.
Which lets other bigger things fly through undetected.
Precisely. Once you open that corridor, you can funnel your heavy hitters through. And that brings us to the Flamingo.
Let's pivot to that because the blind corridor is just the doorway. The Flamingo is what's walking through it. This connects to that idea of strategic interdiction. We're not talking about hitting a tank anymore.
No, we're talking about hitting the factory that makes the parts for the tank, or in this case, the SCIF-M factory in Belgorod. SCIF-M is a perfect textbook example. On the surface, it just looks like another industrial building, but it manufactures specialized drills, cutters, things for aerospace materials.
So we're talking about special tools for titanium and aluminum alloys.
Exactly. You cannot build a modern fighter jet with off-the-shelf tools. Titanium just eats standard steel for breakfast. You need incredibly precise, hardened, custom tooling to machine the airframe of an Su-34 bomber or the advanced Su-57.
So Ukraine found this critical choke point?
And they struck it with terrifying precision. We have satellite imagery from the 25th and 26th. Of course, Russian sources claim they intercepted all the missiles. That's their standard line.
Right, the old intercepted by the building defense?
The imagery tells the real story. 4 Flamingo missiles were launched. 4 impacts are clearly visible on the roof of the main production hall. All 4 hit within an 80-meter radius. That is high precision.
And the implication here is massive. Even if Russia has the raw materials, the raw titanium, and the engines,
they can't shape the metal. It creates a massive production bottleneck. By destroying SCIF-M, Ukraine has likely halted, or at least severely delayed, production and repair of Russia's most advanced aircraft for months.
this success seems to ride on this Flamingo missile, the FP5. I was looking at the specs. It's a strange beast. Fiberglass fuselage, repurposed jet trainer engines. It almost looked like a garage project.
It does look like a Frankenstein weapon, but that's the genius of it. It uses an AI-25TL engine from old L-39 trainer jets. Ukraine has plenty of those. The fiberglass body naturally reduces its radar signature, but the numbers are what really matter.
The range is the headline, 3,000 kilometers.
It's massive. 3,000 kilometers puts the Ural Mountains in range. It puts almost the entire military-industrial base of European Russia in the crosshairs.
And the payload?
11,150 kilograms.
Which is just enormous.
For context, a standard U.S. Tomahawk cruise missile has a warhead around 450 kilograms. So the Flamingo is carrying more than double the explosive power. It's not a scalpel, it's a sledgehammer.
There's been some chatter about the name Flamingo, even reports of pink paint jobs. Is there some kind of psychological aspect to this?
It's a bit of a myth that's taken off. Early reports mentioned pink prototypes, maybe something to do with the manufacturer, Firepoint, highlighting women in the company. But honestly, the color is irrelevant. In fact, the pink nickname almost works as camouflage for how dangerous this thing is. It sounds harmless. But if you're a factory manager in the Urals, it's an absolute nightmare.
And the strategy behind it all is affordable mass. Right? A Tomahawk costs, what, $2 million? Yeah.
And a Flamingo is estimated around $500,000. So for the price of one Western missile, Ukraine can launch 4 Flamingos. This allows for what they call the flock tactic.
Flock. So you just swarm the defenses?
Exactly. Russian air defense is capable, you can't deny that. But every system has a saturation point. If you launch a flock of, say, 10 Flamingos at SCIF-M, and the Russians shoot down 80% of them, which would be a very good day for their crews,
that still leaves 2 missiles getting through.
And since they're sledgehammers with 1,150-kilo warheads, 2 is all you need to level that building.
The other critical point here is permission. We spend so much time debating whether the U.S. or Germany will allow strikes deep inside Russia.
The Flamingo makes that debate partially moot. This is Ukrainian-made. They're targeting a production rate of 210 units a month. That is strategic autonomy. They don't need a green light from Washington to strike a factory in the Urals. It lets Ukraine dictate the tempo.
It's not just the long-range stuff, though. This war on logistics is happening closer to the front, too, targeting what you call the drone ecosystem. We had that strike on the Atlant Aero Factory in Taganrog confirmed.
Right. Taganrog is in Rostov, a critical hub. Atlant Aero makes the Molniya or Lightning Strike drones. These are those cheap, fixed-wing, loitering munitions that have been such a problem for Ukrainian infantry.
So again, the same logic. Don't just swat the fly, burn down the place where it breeds.
Destroy the whole ecosystem. The strike on January 13th, which we now have full confirmation on, took out the final assembly workshop and admin offices. But it's not just manufacturing. Yesterday, there was a strike on a drone control center near Velika Novosilka.
That's a different kind of target. That's an active military unit on the line.
It is, but the effect is informational blindness. In modern war, your artillery and your tanks, they rely on drones to see. So if you decapitate the control center, the screens just go black. The Russian artillery in that entire sector is suddenly firing blind. It completely freezes their ability to maneuver because they don't know if they're walking into an ambush.
Okay, so we've talked about blinding radars, blinding artillery, destroying factories, but there's this whole economic layer to this war, specifically with oil.
The tour of destruction, as some analysts are calling it, Penza product, Gaz, the Kolsolskaya depot. We're seeing a 51% increase in successful strikes on refineries and depots heading into 2026.
It's a starvation strategy.
It starves the tanks of diesel, yes. But more importantly, it burns up Russia's wallet. Oil is the primary source of revenue for the Kremlin. Every depot that goes up in flames is millions of dollars in lost revenue and replacement costs.
And yet, despite all this, this high-tech dismantling of their rear, the Russian army keeps pushing on the ground. This brings us to this grim paradox of the war right now.
It is a paradox. You have high-tech precision on one side and just sheer biological mass on the other. The casualty numbers from CSIS and ISW are horrifying.
They are. Since February 2022, Russia has suffered approximately 1.2 million casualties. I mean, to put that in perspective, that's roughly the entire active-duty population of the U.S. military. It's a demographic catastrophe.
And what have they gained for those 1.2 million people?
That's the question.
In all of 2025, their total territorial gains were about 0.8% of Ukraine. In the recent Pokrovsk offensive, they were advancing at an average rate of 70 meters per day.
70 meters, that's less than a football field.
With World War I pacing, it is actually slower than the Battle of the Somme. And that creates this strange duality. Russia is winning on the ground at 70 meters a day by expending thousands of lives, while Ukraine is striking 3,000 kilometers deep.
It feels like Russia is just trying to compensate for their loss of a technological edge by throwing more bodies into the fire.
That is exactly what's happening. But there's a geopolitical wildcard here we can't ignore. That Telegraph report from January 28th about China.
Right. The report stating China provided over $10 billion in tech to Russia.
And critically, that includes CNC machines. So you see the dynamic. Ukraine blows up the SCIF-M factory to destroy the tooling. Russia turns to China to import new CNC machines to replace them. It becomes a race between destruction and resupply.
And those machines are being used to build things like the Oreshnik missile, which we saw used on Lviv.
The Oreshnik is Russia's answer. It's a hypersonic, intermediate-range ballistic missile. We're talking Mach 10, multiple warheads.
It sounds terrifying, but you've argued it's more of a psychological weapon.
It is strategic signaling. The Oreshnik is expensive, and they don't have many of them. Heating a factory in Lviv with a Mach 10 missile doesn't actually change the physical outcome of the war, but it is designed to scare NATO. It's Russia saying, look what we have things you can't shoot down.
So we have this stark contrast. Russia uses the Oreshnik to create fear as psychological play.
And Ukraine uses the Flamingo to destroy factories, a physical logistical play. Russia is betting that fear and exhaustion will break Ukraine before the physical destruction of their war economy breaks the Kremlin.
It's a hell of a gamble. But looking at the events of just the last 24 hours, the radar gone, the grid hit, the depot destroyed, it seems Ukraine is betting on a systemic collapse.
Which really raises the fundamental question for everyone listening. In a war of attrition, how do you define the winner? Is it the army that captures a ruined village by advancing 70 meters a day?
Or is it the army that burns down the factory building the guns 3,000 kilometers away? That is the question that will likely define 2026. The map lines tell one story, but the satellite images of burning refineries, they tell a completely different one. You've been listening to Defense Report by Alex and Aria, where we analyze the latest in military strategy, global defense, and advanced weaponry. If you want to keep track of every meter and every missile, make sure you subscribe to Defense Reports, your go-to source for timely, in-depth military and defense reports. We'll catch you next time.